Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session today at COVID-19, Pandemic Proofing Our Supply Chain. One of the things that COVID has shown us is that our supply chains are deeply fragile in times of turbulence. From food to transport, we rely on the power of people and resources to see goods and services travel far and wide. Post-COVID, we will need to find novel ways of strengthening our supply chains to make sure they don't break in times of turbulence. How this is done is up to the technologists and think tanks of the world. Is it through big data, good policy, and new tools? We're now going to talk about how we can pandemic-proof globalization. I'm your moderator today. My name is Louise Samet. I'm a partner at Blossom Capital, an early-stage VC fund leading Series A rounds across Europe. As our panelists today, we have Vishal Chatrath, co-founder and CEO of Prowler.io, Mark Buckle, head of innovation at Kuehne and Nagel, James Baker, CEO at Graphene at Manchester, Melissa Gordon, Senior Vice President and General Manager, Marketplace and Platform at Tradeshift, Vivek Koncherry, Managing Director at Space Blue Limited. Thank you so much for joining me for this discussion today. And how about we all introduce ourselves quickly? Vishal, do you want to go first?
Thanks, Louise. My name is Vishal Chatrath. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Prowler.io. We are a company that has an AI engine that helps make decisions for some of the world's largest supply chain organizations, allowing them to plan their supply chains to be more resilient and also recover better post-COVID.
Mark, do you want to go next?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Mark Buckle. I'm the head of Logtech innovation at Canonical. We are a leading global provider of innovative and fully integrated supply chain solutions. My current role involves the management of a global innovation portfolio and the practical application of new technologies in the logistics and supply chain management context. My absolute passion is acting as that bridge between idea generation and business execution. Currently located in Switzerland, working at Canonical's head office in Zurich. And I would just like to say it's a privilege to be on the CogX stage today and looking forward to the discussions ahead.
Thank you. And James?
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm from the University of Manchester, James Baker, the CEO of Graphene at Manchester. So graphene, first discovered by two scientists in Manchester by taking sticky tape and graphite. You can all try this at home. If you peel over many, many times, you can isolate a single atomic layer of carbon, or graphene. So what? It then has fantastic properties like stronger than steel, firmly electrically conductive, act as new membranes. But in the context of the discussion here today, new materials and manufacturing, I think, can play a key role in our future supply chain. By adding a small amount of graphene, you can start to either recycle, so environmental sustainability, through to actually creating new supply chain through advanced manufacturing, combining materials with manufacturing with, for example, Industry 4.0 or artificial intelligence. So really opportunity to really strengthen new types of supply chain coming out of the COVID situation.
Thank you. And Melissa?
Hi, my name is Melissa Gordon, and I'm a general manager here at Tradeshift. And Tradeshift is a leader in supply chain payments and marketplaces. We connect buyers and sellers and help them digitize transactions in their trade. So we connect people across the world, across 190 different countries, and offer solutions from procure to pay to supplier engagement and financial services. So there's about a few $100 billion of trade flowing through our network annually. And also what's pretty interesting in these times is we've been able to see kind of adjustments in global supply chains at an aggregate level. And, when one economy or macroeconomic hub is down, what shifts globally as well. So it's it's been a pretty interesting time for us.
Thank you. And Vivek?
Hi, I invented and developed a graphene enhanced recycled rubber floor mat to address the global problem of waste tire. This is a product we made using waste car tire and graphene. This is a mass market product. One of the biggest challenge when we recycle any material is performance drop. Working in collaboration with Graphene at Manchester Geek, we solved this problem. Thanks to Graphene, sustainability is no more about compromise. What I learned from James Baker early on is that working in collaboration with the right partners and speed of innovation, we can solve any problem. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. So to start off, let's start with the current situation. What are the general COVID impacts that you're seeing across global supply chains?
Okay, so I think the first thing to say is that different industries are affected in different ways. But in general, I think you can describe the impacted areas categorized in the area of suppliers, operations and customers. So starting off with suppliers, first of all, what we're seeing is financial distress in some of the areas due to widespread order cancellations. There's also capacity reductions due to enhanced staff safety requirements because of COVID. And there's a challenge to do with capacity constraints from an inbound supply chain point of view, particularly from a transportation perspective. Operations, then plants are partially or fully closed, reducing the level of output. There's increased forecast difficulty because the demand is so uncertain. And one of the positive impacts is collaboration is even more necessary now than ever before. So within internal operations and with suppliers and partners to try and react to the shorter reaction times that are necessary. And from a consumer perspective, we've all seen the news, we've seen the media, whereby stockpiling is occurring, and this is leading to short-term demand increase for some products. And then on the other side, we have this demand reduction for non-critical products. So what this is doing is it's driving more focused discussions, I think, around the impact of COVID. So what can supply chains do? At the moment, there's discussions around regionalization, localization of supply chains, acceleration regarding digitalisation and automation. How do we use this as an opportunity to push the sustainability program that so many corporations have signed up to, and particularly that is so close to my heart, a greater focus on data and process integration across the enterprise using technologies like AI that combine both human and machine intelligence into real assisted decision making. And I think Vishal will go into more detail around the great work that Prowler are doing in this area.
Yeah, would you like to mention something on that?
Yeah, so I think, sorry, is that for me or is it for Melissa?
If you wanted to.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the key points that Mark actually sort of brought up here was regionalization and localization. So that's a completely a new aspect of planning for the supply chains post-COVID, for which there is no data in the past, because not only are we dealing with the systematic short-term shocks against which we have to plan the supply chains and also hedge capacity on a week-on-week-on basis, but also as the decoupling of the global supply chain is happening away from China to build a resilient supply chain, the question becomes that how do we plan for that recovery scenario where new supply chains need to be created which don't have such a strong reliance on China. So don't get me wrong, China is a fantastic place to basically manufacture, but what we have learned from COVID that we can't have over-reliance on one part of the world because that has a strong knock-on effect. against which it can be very hard to recover. So one of the work that we do at Crawler when we are trying to use our AI engine is helping executives and companies understand what is the most effective way to build a resilient supply chain that can be demonstrated to be reliable, because every single shareholder and every single government and voters going forward for the next 5 or 10 years will be demanding demonstrable resilience as a part of the strategy.
Thank you. And Melissa, what are you seeing at Tradeshift?
Of course. So I'd say what's interesting has been we started seeing some very strong kind of macro trends back in February. And we've actually, when we aggregated a macro level, not for individual companies or customers on our platform, but from a macro and country perspective, we did some work with the World Economic Forum to be able to even look at the data a bit more, showing kind of week-on-week trade effect, really starting with China in February, and seeing that, we were seeing like 50+% transaction drops, and that was mid-February in China, and that followed suit in US, UK, Europe, with not as sharp, but like 25, and then continuing like 15-16% drops continually in April. So yeah, what we've seen is like this really big kind of shifting in order volume, invoice volume, and can see that real effect on that economic impact on a week-on-week perspective. So it really comes down to how can diverse sourcing and digitization be the key to building those stronger, smarter supply chains and have a lasting recovery, and have not the and really have the visibility and ability to understand and have a company and businesses overall have diverse access to goods. So from that standpoint, it's been definitely a big effect globally, and we saw it starting as early as mid-February with like massive drops in network activity, starting with China. So as countries have started to reopen, it's definitely, you can't kind of holistically support one country's entire growth, internal domestic activity. So cross-border trade's really a huge deal, and that's also going in flux as certain countries are opening and certain countries are slowly starting up again.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing. Do you think that the objectives or focus areas of supply chains have changed because of COVID?
Okay, so from my perspective, there's one objective that continues to be core, and that is synchronizing supply and demand with the right flow of goods, information, and finance, regardless of the environment, will continue to be the core objective. But what we're starting to see now within the recovery are a better understanding of the new requirements. And I think what will be the key differentiator right now is understanding the new requirements, adapting to them, but also at the same time balancing performance and cost, along with the normal value levers of good supply chain management. So flexibility, sustainability that Vivek and James are focusing on, efficiency, resilience, the visibility. But the one final thing I suppose to point out in light of COVID is that supply chains must be driven by this need to introduce systematic ways of increasing the repeatability of the right decisions being made dynamically across the length and breadth of the supply chain. And what we're focusing on is very much data, tech, humans at the center of this, and how you convert the intelligence of the supply chain into machines through artificial intelligence.
Cool. Anyone else want to continue on this point? Yeah, go ahead.
So just to really add that, so one thing I'm certainly observing is I think in reaction to the fact that we were very arguably badly prepared, there is a sort of a talk around, in the future, how we might secure supply chains in the future. And again, if I just pick a fairly reactive example from the UK, was the ventilator challenge. You can argue it's very positive in the way industry from aerospace to automotive to, in the UK, the Catapult organisation responded to the provision of ventilators. But also, if you look at the provision of PPE as another example, from people in their shed through to local manufacturing producing forms of PPE, I think people will start to look at the security of the supply chain. And my background from an aerospace defence background, there was some dialogue around sovereign capability going back in history, which was probably misused around local manufacture. But I think if I look at it more positively, I think people are looking at those supply chain routes. And if I look at innovation, how might we do things differently in a more integrated way to secure those supply chains in the future? And I think there's an opportunity there for building those supply chains. I think a key theme going forward, again, as a positive I've seen, is the opportunity for partnership and collaboration. And I think those who can collaborate across borders, internationally, locally, I think there will be an increased enhancement around that collaboration agenda going forward.
Cool. And how would you say that data and AI would contribute to pandemic-proofing supply chains?
I think that's a good question. I'd like to first speak about data, then AI, and then try to combine them together. So I think talking about the AI for pandemic proofing, thankfully, pandemics don't happen very regularly. And therefore, we don't have too much data about past pandemics. So obviously, any of the standard AI and machine learning tools that were past created, like deep neural nets, like linear regression, simply cannot be used because you fortunately don't have millions of data points to actually model the pandemic. However, even in the light of very little data, you couldn't stop using the systems because companies had to continue deploying their supply chains, like Kuehne and Nagel and a couple of our other partners and customers. They had to, on a weekly basis or a daily basis or a monthly basis, had to hedge capacity, whether it was hedging capacity for trucks, ships, aeroplanes into which products had to be shipped. Now, within that sort of environment, how much capacity do you hedge? While we don't have data, we have institutional knowledge because people have been working in the supply chain for 10, 20, 30 years on those trading desks. At the same time, probably they have not seen the pandemic, but through their experience have built institutional knowledge, which we have found a way to embed and further improve our models so that we were able to improve the predictions that allowed us to make better decisions in the scenario of the pandemic as it was going. And for good or for bad, we had this dubious situation by which all our three main customers went live with our solutions in the December 2019 to January 2020 timeframe. So we barely launched the solution a few weeks, and then we had COVID, and we were able to end up and show and demonstrate that with the predictions that we had, we were able to hold up better in a COVID scenario against a system that would have held up in what I can best describe as normal scenarios. So that really showed us the power, as Mark was talking about, of combining human institutional knowledge with AI models, because ultimately these two things cannot be separated. So from COVID, we learned that existing tools and AI machine learning, basically methods that we've been using in past that relied on lots and lots of data, are simply not applicable in difficult scenarios. And the next thing we learned was that the existing supply chains are very, very fragile. And that also showed up specifically from the fact that we had shortage of PPEs, which I won't go into. It's been over-reported in the press. But it also showed that companies that had built strategic reserves fared much better, like Switzerland, like the Nordics, like Germany. And the companies that had not built up strategic reserves fared much worse. Now, a key aspect as where AI plays a part is over the next 12 months, and I would argue even over the next 5 years, it'll become a critical part of every Fortune 500 CEO's job description to have a demonstrable recovery or resilience strategy for their supply chains as a part of the KPIs. Like in the last 5 years, every CEO had to show that they had an AI strategy. Over the next 5 years, every CEO will have to show they have a demonstrable, and I would add the word demonstrable, strategy for recovery and resilience for their supply chains. And that's where AI will play a key part, specifically the kind of AI that relies on very small amounts of data and also is able to react very quickly to a dynamically changing environment.
Cool. Anything to add on that point? No? Super. Yeah, Melissa?
Yeah, I guess I'd agree with that. I think the ability to quickly rethink and adjust is something that is necessary. I think, like we've been talking about, a shift to digital and a requirement for people to really look at creating smart and nimble supply chains is going to be a requirement for companies. And, I think it's exposed a lot of the inherent risks of inventory and single sourcing models, that have been more driven by cost control. So in that way, seeing that, kind of with its negative effects, cost positive, but really having when you focus at single sourcing models, a risk with stability there. So there's questions around this decentralization and thinking about bringing production home, and seeing a trend that effectively looking at does it make sense for certain countries moving parts of their supply chain production back home. And I think this all starts with this digitization that we're so involved in. And you can't do any of this unless you're actually working with digital information that can be analyzed, for that matter.
Yeah. So one of the things that has really been visible is how incredibly strong it can be when people and companies are really, really quick to adapt. So out of this awful situation of COVID, what are the positives or messages of hope for global supply chains?
I think there are many. That's the good thing. Answering this generally, then I would say the first thing is supply chain and logistics professionals. They've been on the front line of this response, and in general, that there's an appreciation that logistics and supply chain is keeping the wheels of the economy moving, and actually bringing it so into a stark light that the consequences actually in some cases saving lives with their actions. So that's an incredibly positive message for the industry in general, keeping the flow of medicine and essential items, delivering PPE and COVID-19 test kits to the front line, continuing to deliver food and vital supplies to supermarkets as demand for some products spikes and supply lines are challenging all at the same time. So that there are many stories of initiatives now that would have taken many months to implement in normal circumstances, but they're taking a matter of days. So we have one site that set up a new kitting operation for COVID-19 test kits in 5 days. That's an incredible feat. We transitioned 40,000 office-based colleagues to working from home over a weekend. So I think the pandemic has brought into sharp focus that mastery of supply chains and investment in supply chain management contributes to the success of company goals, especially in crisis situations. And this is now reflected in the frequency and I think the importance of supply chain management conversations that are currently taking place in the C-suite and in the boardrooms across the world. And actually, if I don't mind, one final point there is the environmental benefits. So our planet is taking a deep breath, and I think we all have to have an appreciation for that. Record falls in CO2 emissions, so it's a positive message at the moment. We just need to sustain that now to ensure that the recovery has sustainability at the very heart of it.
I mean, I was going to just build on what Mark's just said there, really. I mean, I talked about ventilators and the PPE supply. I think it's a really good opportunity or demonstration of collaboration. I mean, also, I'm actually on an advanced materials pandemic task force that's looking around how we might collaborate in the future across international boundaries around vaccines, around PPE, around antiviral surfaces, through to new sorts of sensors that might be developed. And in, gosh, less than 4 weeks, we've now got a steering group that's international. It's got a number of working groups, all people working in their own time. So no funding at the moment. And already we're actually seeing opportunities for collaboration across research, but also taking that research, instead of taking years to develop new vaccines or new sensors, how we might do that in weeks and months rather than traditionally what takes many years. And the final point, and Mark just introduced it, you know, this whole area of sustainability is becoming an increasing agenda. I've not driven to work for 10 weeks now, yet we've continued to do business. Last week, we actually signed up a partner who contacted on LinkedIn. We had a number of discussions. He signed up. We're going to launch a product by Christmas using a graphene enhanced product to make it lighter, stronger. You know, some companies out there still need to innovate to stay ahead. And I think it's actually put some real focus onto those companies who want to survive and want to continue, and how they will innovate to actually be stronger coming out of this COVID situation they perhaps were beforehand. So there are some positives, although there are some difficulties and there are some companies that are clearly challenged. We are, though, seeing those companies who want to innovate, seeing an opportunity here to step ahead and actually get ahead of the curve of some of the competition.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. So what are some of the opportunities that you're seeing, both from a short, mid, and long-term perspective?
So I think in the short term, what we are already seeing is an appreciation for understanding that how important is good decision-making for any planning and application of AI, and how with very low amounts of data, with good application of human reasoning, you can still build very good systems. And a good example of that is that in March, everybody in Europe had the same amount of data from basically COVID. Some governments and some companies chose to not react because there was not enough data, whereas some companies and some governments said, hold on, in the absence of data, we still have human reasoning. How if we embed human reasoning and complement that with whatever data that we have and use that to make a decision or an action? Because from our perspective, AI is all about making decisions. And we've been able to show that and reflect that. And I think that sort of almost like takes the excuse from any organization, whether it be governmental or non-governmental, to outsource their brain to data and say that they couldn't do anything because there wasn't any data. And again, use it as a positive to force people to apply human reason and be more responsible about the future of our economy, and accordingly make decisions about sustainability, make decisions about robustness. We will, and we don't have any data on how to make our planet more sustainable, because for the past few hundred years we've been burning more carbon. But we have reason, and we have to understand how to apply reason with the models to model in simulation a better world that we can build.
Thank you. Anyone wants to add something to that? James?
Just briefly, before maybe introduce Vivek, is for me, we spoke at the CogX platform yesterday about the opportunity for advanced manufacturing materials and digital manufacturing in the UK, what we call Industry 4.0. And for me, there's a real opportunity. Traditionally, new materials take many tens of years from the lab, from the universities, through to reaching products and applications. If we can do that in a much more concurrent partnership way, linking advanced materials with manufacturing, but also, in terms of advanced manufacturing tools, for me, we can start to reduce that lead time and start to look differently about how the supply chain is actually created. So things like additive manufacturing as one example, through to by adding graphene into something, you can start to transform the product. So adding into rubber, you can get a rubber that is both grippy and soft, but it's also very durable. So for me, there's a really exciting opportunity both in the short term for enhancement of supply chain and products, and in the future, creating completely new products that will disrupt the supply chain. So again, using the graphene example, adding graphene into a membrane means I can take dirty, salty, contaminated water through a simple device, through a graphene membrane to create drinking water. That could really disrupt the way we provide food across boundaries or how we have water supply. So really great opportunities for both short-term, medium, and the long-term by doing this much more integrated manufacturing materials and digital. I think there's some really exciting opportunities going forward.
Super exciting. So how is the increased focus on sustainability impacting the way we produce both materials and goods?
I think a few years from now, we may forget the problem what we are facing today. So what I think is our long-term objective should be focusing on sustainability and circular economy. To get this right, there are four parties. One is the customer, then there's manufacturers, then there is government, and then there is innovation centers. As a customer, sustainability is no more a luxury for the few. It's affordable to all. So it's about the choices we make. As a manufacturer, to pandemic-proof our supply chain and to get the next 10 years right, we are focusing on local manufacturing for the local market. But as a company, we do have global ambitions. So for an example, in the future, we will make in the US using US-based tires for the US market. But also government have a role to play as well. As an example, tires should be included in the producer responsibility regulation, which means end of life of a product, manufacturer is responsible for recycling. And if we add more and more products into this category, then manufacturers will choose the right materials to start with instead of we dealing with a problem afterwards. In addition to the innovation centers also have a key role to play. Like, it is easy to say we need to make in the UK or make in the West, but it's not that simple. The system worked in Asia, in China or India or somewhere will not work in the UK because of the cost of production. So we need to have innovation centers and collaborations. In my case, Graphene at Manchester is helping me to manufacture the products in the UK at a very cost-effective ways. We are researching on this area at the minute. But it is about collaboration is the only way we can go forward and get things right. Thank you.
Thank you. And how do you think sourcing, production, and manufacturing is going to be changed?
But if I could add one thing, one of the things from a logistics standpoint that we see and hear now as a discussion point is that shift or the evaluation of single sourcing. So that there were many supply chains that source certain products, whether that was finished products or whether that was product to feed into the production line from single suppliers. So I think at least the supply of products will be reviewed for sure to try and spread that risk and have that opportunity that if there's an outbreak of COVID in one part of the world, then either volume can be shifted to another supplier outside of the affected region or so on.
Yeah, I think I completely second Mark's comments there that the sourcing side will change quite dramatically because if you've been around from the 1990s, of that vintage, in those days when I started my career, it was completely unheard of to have a single source supply. So we used to have at least 3 or 4 suppliers of every sort of a product, and every year we balanced capacity just to keep, make sure all the suppliers were there in case of, any sort of in those cases, not just a pandemic, but in case of any natural disasters and so on and so forth. Now, I think that sort of a learning over the past 20 years, at least I've noticed, has been forgotten to a large extent. And this is like a rude awakening. And the opportunity out there is, of course, that a lot of that manufacturing capacity that moved out of Europe in the past 20 years will start coming back. So we'll see a big shift in regionalization and nearshoring of sourcing, of production, of manufacturing that, of course, will have environmental benefits, because if you have to move around stuff less, you send less CO2 up into the atmosphere.
I agree.
From my side, I think I called it sovereign supply chain is going to be increasingly important. So is environmental, but so is productivity and cost. So, we can have very good language about local supply chain and environmentally friendly, but if we can buy cheaper or effectively from international, how do we actually balance that, from a finance viewpoint? So again, for me, this whole productivity argument, going back to this dialogue around advanced manufacturing materials, we've got to try to find better, faster, cheaper ways of doing these local supply chain that is also environmental sustainable and also secures that security of supply. So I think it's really that different way of thinking around the collaborative nature of future supply chains is going to be increasingly important. But I think the COVID situation has brought that to a focus because of some of the disruption, because of some of the failures and some of the successes. But I think getting that right will be increasingly important in supply chains in the future.
I agree with what everyone's been saying here around collaborative natures of supply chains needing to be a central requirement in the future, and removing the single sourced models and having more of a decentralization of manufacturing capacity. So I do think that all of those things are going to drive big changes.
One further point from my perspective, Louise, I think production of either raw materials or finished product is one thing, but the focus on production and supply has to also go into cash flow, cash flow management of the entire value chain. So, okay, the days of hammering down suppliers on price, if there is a second wave or a third wave, resilience of supply chain starts with looking after suppliers as well. So another booming focus area within supply chain is trade finance and almost customers supporting suppliers with really smart trade finance solutions.
I think that's a really big point, and I think I can probably subscribe to that as a tiny company and as a startup, because I think as we support larger customers, all with respect to cash flow and with respect to kind of elements related to also the sustainability of our business, I think trade finance becomes a key aspect of that, taking into account all the kind of payments terms with the global supply chains and the risk associated with it.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think one aspect that we haven't touched on, which I think will also have a big impact, is when the manufacturing jobs for kind of near sourcing and all the production have to move back to Europe or near Europe, I would say, where we don't find the people, because obviously in Northern Europe specifically, we have aging societies, and we don't just have the demographic. Automation will help to a large extent, but obviously the question out there is that with automation, you still need factories. For those factories, you still need power. And Europe primarily produces its electricity from hydrocarbons, because obviously you can't go nuclear anymore because that's completely out of fashion. So the question is, what is the nearest we can build factories where we have energy sources? And I think one of the trends which we might be seeing, and I'm actually kind of betting that we'll be seeing, is that nearshoring will happen in the parts that are near Europe. Could be North Africa, could be the Gulf region, where you have young populations, plenty of energy, not just from hydrocarbons, but those countries are also investing massively in renewables, because there's plenty of sun along the entire belt of North Africa all the way to the Gulf. There's plenty of wind, so I'm seeing a lot of investment there. So big part of the regionalizations of supply chain will involve both the Gulf region and the North African countries.
Also, just to add to this, one thing UK need to stop is exporting pollution. And as example, UK ship 250,000 waste tires to India. Most of it are being burned there. So we need to find a solution here. And coronavirus is a wake-up call. But more than that, we are creating a lot of waste, and we are shipping a lot of waste to third developing countries that need to be dealt with immediately. That's what I think. Thanks.
Cool. That's a very good closing remark. So I think it's clear that we have an amazing opportunity in front of us to create sustainable, future-proof, collaborative supply chains using new technologies such as data and AI. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will continue the discussion in a Q&A session starting shortly, where you'll be able to add your own questions to be discussed. Thank you so much.
What a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Louise. Great panel. I really, really enjoyed it. I hope you do too. It gives me so much hope to hear the same words that keep coming up again and again as all over all of these panels as we look into building a fairer, more ethical, more sustainable future. Multi-sector, multidisciplinary, multi-country collaboration keeps coming up. This ecosystems, impact, community, partnership, equality, and of course the massive opportunities are there just waiting for us to grasp them. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to the Q&A session. Enjoy the Q&A, and I'll see you again tomorrow.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.